Let's talk a little bit about the PC Technician's Toolkit. In our class we're going to have a little toolkit, and I'll be giving you this toolkit very soon. We'll be using it for our labs, and so I just want to talk about some of the parts inside of it. First thing we'll have in our toolkit is, or thing I want to talk about anyway, is the wrist strap. It's used for static electricity. If you're working inside the PC, you want to be careful about static electricity, and so we use a little strap. You put on like a wristwatch. It has a really high ohm resistor inside of it, so that it discharges static electricity from your body safely to ground and prevents you from zapping the chips inside the computer, and that's very easy to do actually. You can easily damage your memory or other CPU and other chips inside your computer. So this is a safety device. You can really do the same thing just by touching the case of your computer too, but the problem is we often forget to do that, and it just takes one momentary lapse in memory and you've fried chips in your computer. So it's really useful to have one of these, and they're a little thing that doesn't cost much in it, you might think it's dangerous to be connected to a computer with a wire, but we generally don't work on a computer when it's on, so we want to have it unplugged. But even if you did have it plugged in, this thing has a very high resistance, so you wouldn't get shock from it. It's way over 1 million ohms of resistance. The toolkit, as you can see here, includes a number of different components, and your toolkit looks just about exactly like this. And the main thing that we need are some screwdrivers, both Phillips and straight screwdrivers. So we have different sizes for that, and this computer mostly uses 2 different size screws, and you'll see that when we start getting into it. One's called a coarse threaded screw, and the other's a fine threaded screw, and you can see that one of them, they don't fit from each other's holes too well. What the little bottle is sometimes used for is to put screws in. So if you have a little bottle, that's a nice thing to have to put in your kit. And then we have nut drivers. Those are for nuts, and there's sometimes even nuts in your kit. And there's some other tools here we don't use so often, but basically most of the thing you use is a screwdriver for most things, and there's a little driver here too that you can use. That's very handy to have sometimes for other things. And there's a chip puller if you need to pull an integrated circuit out of a socket. We don't do that very often, but it comes in your kit. Really, this is an electronic technician toolkit, and works great for computers. And I'll give you one of those, and you can keep it. It's for you to keep. We also will use some software, and I'll supply that as we need it, and different software. Software is used as kind of like a tool because we want to diagnose problems in a computer. So there's a number of programs we use for that. Some of the programs are built into the operating system and even part of the computer's BIOS. But sometimes we use it off a CD disk or have to load it into the operating system. Now, let me ask you a question. What is electrostatic discharge, and why is it important, and what do we do about it? Well, it is a transfer of charge. It's electrostatic, refers to static electricity. So really what it is when you walk across the floor or something like that, you can often pick up a charge, and that happens very easily. You can build up thousands of volts just by walking a few feet, and we don't notice it much because we might get a little spark, and we touch something and it's a little annoying, but to the little tiny transistors inside of a microchip, which are the size of tiny virus, that kind of voltage is lethal, and it'll kill it. So we want to be really careful about that. What are some of the tools that we see in here? Well, this toolkit, this guy here, number 1, is called a Torx driver, and that's used for special screws. We have an extraction tool, which is used for pulling out little chips and things out of, or maybe pulling a screw and that is actually a pretty handy thing. Sometimes you drop a screw down inside your case, and by the way, you want to get those screws out. If they fall inside your case, pull them out, because if you leave them in there, they can short things out and damage things. And so a lot of computers have been ruined just because of a loose screw rolling around inside. So use that extraction kit, that tool, to get that out of there. The star driver is used for some special screws that sometimes you find on computers. You'll find these things sometimes on the front of the case, or other places like that. There's a place for screws, a place to hold a bottle of screws. There's a Phillips screwdriver, and there's a regular flat tip or slotted screwdriver inside your kit. Now I'll talk a little bit about integrated circuits. You'll notice if you look inside your computer, you're going to see these things called, we refer to them as chips, and the whole computer is made out of these things. Now here we have a picture of a hard drive, and on the hard drive there's a special printed circuit board called the hard drive controller, and it's a little computer really, and it has several chips on it, or integrated circuits. And what is an integrated circuit? Well, it's a bunch of electronic parts all built into one single chip of silicon, silicon being a mineral that they get from sand. And the transistors, resistors, and other electronic parts are all built in there, and they mass produce these things. And the way they do it is really very clever. They use light. They put light through a picture of what they want to make, and that's called the photomask. The light goes through and then is focused down to a little point on the surface of a piece of silicon called a wafer. And so by doing that, you can have a big mask or a big picture of what you want to put on your chip, but then you can reduce it down to a very small size because we don't need it to be that big. We don't want it to be that big, otherwise our computers would be huge, you see, with all its miniaturization. And then the little tiny chips that are placed on there have to be sawed apart. And now they call this process photolithography. And photolithography means light, and litho means rock. So it's light on a rock. Oh, silicon really is a kind of rock. And then once that image is put on there, then we develop it. Now there has to be a coating on the surface of the chip to do this. That's called a photoresist coating. And what that coating does is it protects the part of the silicon we want to keep, and it allows, and when it's developed, then we wash away some of that, and those are places where we can etch the surface, and that's where the photolithography comes in, and that's where it basically takes some of the silicon off with an acid and converts it to wires and electronic components such as transistors and resistors. And it's not just one time we do this. It's actually a multi-step process, so it's quite an involved thing, and I'm a little bit oversimplifying it here. When you get all done, though, what you end up with is different layers. So you can do this process more than once, and these would be what the actual chip would look like inside. You can see individual transistors here. These things are wires, and the wires go up and down, and they also go sideways. So a lot of it's wiring, and then the transistors are like the circuits, the switches for the binary, the on and off values. That's really what computers are. There's a lot of little switches. So those little switches are located all throughout the chip and connected together, and it's quite and there could be maybe 20 different layers or more on a chip. Very complicated process, but the idea is simple enough. It's just that the actual putting the idea to work can be kind of complicated. So what is an integrated circuit? Well, it's just another name for a chip, and a chip is a collection of electronic components, and that mainly is transistors and resistors and a few other things. Transistors being like switches, and resistors are used to control current. And a semiconductor, that's what we refer to as the material that chips are made out of. Semiconductor materials are materials that sometimes conduct electricity and sometimes don't. They either act like an insulator or a conductor, or sometimes halfway in between. What is a photomask? Well, the photomask job again is to act as a picture of our circuit, and that's the thing that we shoot the light through to develop the image onto the surface of the silicon. And then photoresist is a chemical layer that's applied to the surface of the silicon, and what that's there for is to protect the silicon so that it doesn't get etched by the acid. They use an acid to develop the silicon. And then this process is repeated over and over again to get different layers, so it gets quite involved. Well, that's the end of our presentation for today. I wanted to show you one more thing that you want to do today in class, and that is that we are going to work on a lab together. So I'll let the instructor there show you, that's me, in live, and I went ahead and put this video up to show everybody what we talked about in class today, and probably ended up showing it to you as well. But so I'll go ahead and take a break here, and when we come back we'll talk about the lab today.